Everybody. Good evening and good evening all, and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land, on the internet world, at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Cue. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It is Tuesday, 10th January, 2023. It is the fifth Tuesday of 2023. And it's just about 5 minutes after 8 p.m., after 8 a.m. at Q95, the big station. We're live as usual on Facebook, on YouTube. Follow us at Q95 FM Radio. The website, as you know, is www.q95da.com. Please share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, only on Q95, the big station. Somebody's mic might be open. If you could just mute your mic, that would make things a little bit better. Yeah. So yes, we love our little Dominica, little nature island Dominica, and we are continuing to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love, of peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. That's what we do here on the Global VNQ. My guest tonight, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, former Prime Minister of Dominica, Edison Chenfield James, former CSA or Civil Service Association General Secretary, Alvin Thomas. Good evening, gentlemen. Hope everybody's doing great. The topic tonight is completion and implementation of all electoral reform by June 2023, in keeping with the schedules recommended by Sir Dennis Byron. That is what I personally would really like to see happen. We've been waiting on this thing and dilly-dallying for too long now. Let's get it done and get it over with. Level the playing field. So the question is, passing the Registration of Electors Act, that's an important one, and the Regulation of Elections Act in Parliament now without delay. I think to me that is what is important. So as to allow the Electoral Commission to do its own groundwork, to cleanse the voters list and complete the registration processes and issue the voter ID cards over the next 5 months or so, by June 2023, hopefully. And then forthwith move to implement the further recommendations of Sir Dennis Byron as regards, I hope that he certainly does make some recommendations about institutional or electoral commission restructuring and campaign finance reforms. I think the way the electoral commission is now constituted, there's too much power in the hands of the political directorate. Two opposition members, two of the Labour Party members, and then the chairman appointed by the president and the advisor of the prime minister. That tilts the balance too much control. So we'd like to see something done that is a little better, to give the electoral commission itself a lot more control. It's supposed to, in fact, be an independent body, all right, so that it can be in a position to hold free and fair elections in Dominica. And certainly we would like to see that happen by the first quarter of 2024. Let's all look forward to that. And let's all make our contributions to ensure that that can happen. So here are some talking points tonight. And we know that there were recommendations made by the people, by the NGOs and civil society, and those recommendations were given to the Electoral Commission and to Sir Dennis Byron. We also know that Sir Dennis Byron has some recommendations that he has made so far. Mr. Skerritt's earlier and more recent postulations we also have that on what he calls election modernization. I'm not sure how that term has come into the discuss now. That he has no issue. He said, in fact, that he has no issue with any of Sir Dennis Byron's recommendations. So if he has no issues with them, let's get on with it, right? Let's get on with it. Get the thing going. Mr. Skerritt has been a little bit of a double talking about elections in the 5 years or so. But he said about in the 5 years or so, by 2027 there'll be elections coming again. But I'm not so sure how he can determine that. He gave us the impression that he will not be prime minister. He will be gone by that time. That's what he had said. So if he's gone and there's a new prime minister, that person would have to determine the date of election. I'm not so sure why he's fixing the date now in his mind, when in fact he already told us it was his last appearance on a campaign platform and as a candidate, and he was not going to be there too much longer. That may be indication of some change of mind, or maybe he didn't tell us the right thing in the first place. So The first session, we also know that the first session of the new parliament is taking place sometime very shortly within the next few days. And we believe that, and I certainly believe that there should be a focus on public support for the passage of the new laws and regulations recommended by Sir Dennis Byron and implementation of the recommendation. And the people, and I think the people need to approve of all of those recommendations. Hopefully there will be an opportunity for people to look at them and approve of them. I believe Sir Byron has been consulting with the political parties and with the political directorate. I hope that people will have a chance also to look at them and to approve of them. So the whole idea, I believe, is for us to move beyond that, get these laws and these regulations in place as recommended and approved, and then get campaign finance reform going as a second phase. I hope that Sir Byron will give us some recommendations on that soon as well, so that we can in fact go ahead and have free and fair general elections, hopefully sometime in March, and let the people decide who they want to govern them for the next period. So meantime, I have the firm view that my own view is that we need some serious changes to be made in our constitution. I believe the United Workers' Party, when they were in office, they made some efforts to make some changes. They didn't stay long enough to implement those changes, but that's a good thing that they were looking in that direction. And the reason I say that is because I don't think it's very much sure thing. It doesn't look like a serious country when a leader of a country can say, I have the election date in my back pocket or in my son's back pocket. I don't think that's how we want to run the affairs of our country. So I believe in two-term limits. That's my view. I'm pretty sure the other panelists may have some views on that. I believe in a fixed election date. I believe that a cabinet that comprises about 11 ministers is adequate for a small country like Dominica, a small economy like Dominica, a small population like Dominica. 11 ministers is more than enough. It used to be that way before. Somewhere along the line that changed. Also, the whole question of a prime minister, I'm not too comfortable myself. I think we might be better served if the prime minister was elected by the entire country. So that is only my views I'm throwing out. At some point in time, when the right time comes, and if somebody's looking at reforming the constitution, might want to look at that. I'm not so sure that the way it's done now, it is the best thing. And I believe if we have two-term limits and a fixed date for elections, I would like to see that if a prime minister is elected nationwide, that the prime minister then selects his cabinet, comes in with his cabinet, and when he goes with his cabinet. I frankly would like to see a lot more power back into the hands of the people, so that we could have the cabinet could be totally, in other words, the executive branch could be totally separate from the legislative branch. That's what I personally would like to see. And in the legislative branch, I would prefer to see a strong presence of local government and representation of the people, whether you can look at them from zones or districts or parishes or whatever it is. Something can be done to put some of those things in place. I don't think that we should have the cabinet taking decisions and they go to parliament and they just rubber stamp those decisions, and and then the people really have very little say. So a budget comes up, they put a budget together, they approve the budget, always the eyes have it. I think the legislative branch should be separate, and it should have some kind of fiduciary responsibility and oversight over the budget process and over the budget itself. And it should approve the budget before the politicians in cabinet can just go ahead and spend money and then come back 3 months later and ask for supplementary estimates because they had project overruns because they didn't do the estimates right in the first place. I think we can be a little bit more efficient than that. So these are just some thoughts I'm throwing out as we go along. That discussion will probably become a bigger discussion later on when we discuss constitutional reform. But really and truly, tonight we're going to focus on the electoral reform. And what I would like to see, in fact, is that I would like to see truly independent national commissions. The pillars of our democracy. I would like to see them protected by the Constitution. I would like to see a truly independent commission, electoral commission, a truly independent IPO, Integrity in Public Office Commission, truly independent police service commission, truly independent public service commission, etc. I certainly believe the Constitution must be much better protect the independence of these institutions and the other pillars of our democracy. And they must not be subject to the whims and fancies of politicians that have gone rogue or who have authoritarian or dictatorial tendencies or aspirations. So we have seen some of those things surfacing. We need to learn some lessons from that. The framers at the time may not have anticipated that we could have people like that who may have those kinds of tendencies and aspirations. So we really need to look to make sure that our constitution can protect our democracy. So as we continue to prepare to embrace Dominica's 45th anniversary of independence in 2023, it's a serious milestone for us. With tonight's distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, former Prime Minister Edison Chenfield James, and former CSA General Secretary Alvin Thomas. So they will help us unravel the answers to these critical concerns that we have, that we will discuss as usual, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous, and we'll do so with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply, as we always do, bringing back civility, a caring society, and a progressive and economic and cultural practices, recognizing, of course, always the imperative for the true resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So tonight, wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, please tune in, call in, get the answers to your questions, join our conversation, be a part of the solution, have your say, as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, on the Global View on Q. So I thank you all sincerely for joining us, you at home, abroad, and for tuning in to our live radio stream on our Facebook and YouTube pages. As usual, send out a huge shout out, hugs, much love, appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, frontline workers, and other public officers doing their very best, often working under difficult conditions. Happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. So let me also take this opportunity to again extend our sincere condolences to you, Mrs. Elizabeth Liz Chillingford, from my family, management of staff of Q95, our Global View on Q guests and panelists tonight, and to the entire Q family listeners worldwide on the passing of your dear husband, Irving, the little master. We wish him a peaceful journey to the Most High. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console at Q95, directing the traffic. We will take your calls a little later tonight. Here are the numbers in any event. It's posted on our webpage at q95da.com, but the people's voice is always a priority. So call us at 767-449-3095-9697. 767-615-4257, 305-432-9624. So let's get started. As we get started, I go over to first to Dr. Irving Andre to get the conversation going, to take a quick peek, first of all, hopefully, on the final days of 2022, now in the rearview mirror, on two homicides that we had from domestic violence, economic instability plaguing our nation, and the unnecessary attempts to ostracize our great calypso writers, their prolific lyrical content and historical, satirical social commentary, and our valued and beloved calypsonians, the best in the region for purposes of political manipulation. Why is that being done to our calypsonians? Simply because they have difficulty in finding glowing things to say about some politicians who may be losing popularity, as indicated by the low voter turnout at the last snap general election in 2022. Our calypsonians must not be blamed if politicians do not have positive accomplishments to sing about, or if they engage in conduct that calls for scrutiny in the lyrics of the calypsos, as has been done for centuries. Dr. Irving Andre, I'll go to you for the first word. You need to unmute your mic because you're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I had to strike my phone with a little hammer, but you have to use the resources that you have to be heard, and that's fine. So let me say good evening once again to Mr. James, the esteemed Mr. James, to brother Lambi Lazarus. Good to see you again. Alvin Thomas, who needs no introduction, a man of great erudition, a man of great integrity. And let me say good evening to you, Mr. James, for the wonderful work you're doing. And let me say good evening to your wonderful listeners. We are at the dawn of a new year, 2023, and many of us couldn't wait to see the passing of the past year because it was fraught with all kinds of difficulties. It witnessed the consistent erosion of rights, the relentless attack on the body politic, and we are poorer for it. And Mr. G, you made mention about Calypsonians. I should say that we're in a season when we should be enjoying, or the Calypso season is perhaps the last bastion of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But in recent days, we have seen it under relentless attack. Many of the scribes and Pharisees, especially those with a political bent, have found their way on radio proclaiming that this is not Calypso. The Calypsos we've heard, they lack the double entendre. They lack the masking that great calypsos possess. And there's those who speak that heresy just betray their ignorance, quite frankly, historically, of calypso at its best. And let me share with you a few examples that illustrate the point I'm trying to make. This is not new, this is well known. But take, for instance, and it can be heard on YouTube, Chalk Doss is afraid. Let me ask those who profess to be experts. Tell me what masking do you find in the lyrics of Chuck Dost's Afraid when he talks about the boy was small, now he 10 foot tall. When he talks about another used to sell coconuts, now he buy the whole ministerial block. Listen to Crow Crow's song. Listen to that song of his, Captain, the boat is sinking. Tell me, where's the subtlety? Where's the double entendre? Where's the masking in that great song, which has outlasted many of the calypsos that you speak of? Talk about the great one, the inimitable one, the mighty sparrow, and listen to the lyrics of his song, Good Citizen. And when he talks, for example, about double deals they idolize, and when he talks about if you are brave enough to open your mouth and criticize, one time you are ostracized and then victimized. If one of our local calypsonians, had included or incorporated those lyrics in his song, can you imagine what the scribes and Pharisees, what St. Thomas of Aquinas would be saying about these calypsos? But this is not all. Listen to Dice. Listen to Dice's song, My Dominica Trade House. What brilliant lyrics when he talks about who can save me now from that which I have become. And then he says, pastors and priests are on my pay list. What brilliance! What a succinct capturing of the depth to which we have become and where we are now. I could go on. I could talk about Checo, for God's sakes. I could talk about other calypsonians, Soulpuss from Marigot, one of my favorites. I could talk about even the gentleman, what's his name, who sang about he gas and no
Daddy
gas.
Chess. Daddy
The
Chess.
daddy chess, daddy chess. I was going to say boy chess, but it's daddy chess. Are you suggesting that these calypsos are deficient because of the standard that you erroneously and ignorantly have set and established? Is that what you're saying? Or this another indication, not that we need any more evidence, that in even in the sphere of calypso, creative writing and singing, there is a relentless effort to control the narrative, to define what people should do and should not do, to define what they should sing and should not sing. And it is within this context that we have to examine the fact that despite all efforts, political electoral reform is as elusive as, for example, probably crabbacks at Christmas. It cannot be found. It is not present. It's as if it is an endangered species. What is the reason for that? The reason is quite obvious. Campaign finance reform, cleaning the voters list, enforcing the laws of Dominica insofar as eligibility to vote. These are the cornerstones of meaningful electoral reform. And let me praise and thank the NGOs, the concerned citizens of Dominica, some pastors and priests who had the audacity to speak eloquently and to speak truth to power about the dearth, about the reluctance, about the decisions deliberately not to pursue these electoral reforms. Rather, what is being suggested are elusive concepts that have no meaning really, that have not found favor with anybody, any government in the Eastern Caribbean, that basically amounts to nothing but a recipe to remain in power, to emasculate the citizenry of Dominica, to keep them in a state of thraldom, to keep them in a state of political impotence, to keep them in a state of beggary where they are dependent on the directorate for the daily bread. The daily bread. And the saddest and unkindest cut of all, Mr. G, is the spectacle of persons who should possess some type of moral authority to see them grovel at the feet of this type of despotic attitude towards the rule of law. The rule of law is not a gift to be handed on tablets of stone by someone in political ascendancy. The rule of law is an inalienable right of the people, and integral to the rule of law is the ability of the people to vote in a meaningful way so that their vote can have some significance. No one should be voted, or no one's right to vote should be on a list where you have hundreds of dead people. I know that there is a miracle described in the Bible, and the name of the person who was resurrected is called Lazarus. But it is impossible to believe that whereas the Almighty Father could rise Lazarus from the dead, the electoral commissioner cannot remove not a single dead person from the voters list. What a shame. What a crying shame. What an indictment of corruption in Dominica. And these are the principalities, these are the flesh and blood that we have to fight against. This is why it's so imperative that the Dominican people decide what type of nation do they want to live. One governed by the rule of law, one in which their constitution provides them with certain rights that they can exercise, free from harassment, free from being deprived economically, free from any kind of coercive conduct by agents of the state. That is the type of Dominica that we cherish. That is the type of Dominica that we have. The last election, if we may call it thusly, was merely the exhibit 100 to clarify and to indicate and again to confirm that there is no commitment to free and fair elections in Dominica. The unseemly haste in which it was called, that it was called on the same day that Sir Byron sent an indication that part 1 of his report is cometh nigh in January of this year. It is not by coincidence. Why is it not by coincidence? Because the electoral paraphernalia had already been purchased. It was being stored, waiting to call this snap election to thwart the work of Sobiron. This was a repudiation of the CCJ, a repudiation of Sobiron, a repudiation of Pastor Rodney and his team, a repudiation of the OAS, a repudiation of all other bodies, expert bodies that is, who were not paid $650,000 to tell us the parameters of free and fair elections. But didn't the Bob make a song? I'll let you sing the song, Mr. G. You have a very nice voice. Somebody told me you were once a singer in the Midnight Grovers band, but I cannot confirm that.
Alvin, they were talking about.
Oh, I see. Sorry, there's so many Gregoires. It could be a different one.
It's Alvin Thomas.
But the fact of the matter is, evil or wrongdoing cannot prosper indefinitely. This is what history teaches us, and we look forth to the day when those of us who cherish our freedom to make a choice that respects our wishes and desires, can go forth and make that choice unencumbered by the iron fist of intolerance, by the iron fist of victimization, by the iron fist of discrimination, by the iron fist of deprivation, when you, on account of your independent views, you're not given the choice of enjoying relief provided by international agencies, because either you or a relative or your auntie or your nene or your cousin hold views which are contrary to those held by members who support the political directorate. And obviously, there are those who support that wonderfully, because quite frankly, their interest reflects the man in the mirror rather than the Dominica we see on a daily basis and the Dominica that we long for. And so, with these opening remarks, I leave it to the, I leave it, or I put it into the hands. I commend it, the topic, into the hands of the esteemed Edison James and Alvin Thomas. Thank you.
Well, let me go to the esteemed former Prime Minister Edison James. Let me just go to him by saying this. After listening to Dr. Andre, and then in my opening remarks, my talking points, I did also indicate, Mr. James, that I love democracy. And one of the ways of preserving our democracy is to change our government now and then. What you may find in some countries, and we may be seeing it happening in ours, when governments say they're too long. Some governments want to say that, some people say they want to stay there for 50 years. But then what happens when you round up people to attack? You round up people to put in jail for incitement. You start attacking Calypsonians. You see, this guy said, you didn't say anything when they came for me. Now, look, it's your turn. So it's the Calypsonians' turn now, right? So it seems to me that it's a good thing to change your government now and then. And that is why I believe in these two-term limits, in this fixed date for election, and in making sure that you take control of your government, because the people supposed to have a lot more power than the political parties that are in office. So, Mr. James, with this, I want to go over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sheridan. Can you hear me?
We're hearing you very well.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, Sheridan, and thank you for inviting me to be on this program tonight. And let me recognize my fellow panelist, Alvin Thomas. I was saying to you when we last spoke, I was in another country. I'm back here now. And Dr. Andre, whom I saw recently. And Sheridan, I was telling you earlier that he hijacked my documents, and I will probably have to get legal advice on how I get them back.
I know a lawyer. I know a lawyer. I'll refer you to a lawyer who will help you with that.
That's for another time. But it was a pleasure, a real pleasure to have had him spend a few minutes with us here in my little jupa, as some people would say. It's a very interesting topic this evening. Let me just start by saying the calypsos I know best are Rose Give Me Blues and Fouchette in the Cabinet. I do not speak, I'm not good at patois, so I'm not so sure what Fouchette means in English. They tell me it's fork in English. So these are two of my favorite calypsos. Rose gave me blows and Fouchette in the cabinet. But you talk about the need to have elections at regular intervals. It is my view that in the absence of electoral reform, and I want to go straight to the topic, in the absence of electoral reform, I've said this, many of us have said this, we will not see a change of government in this country. As far back as 2005, the United Workers' Party, of which I'm a part, embarked upon a mission to seek to bring about meaningful electoral reform. That was reflected in our major rally on the Newtown Savannah, when a gentleman out of Antigua, Sacrosanct Mister, was our guest speaker. That was 2005. By 2008, we had that most notorious and obnoxious email from Anthony Estefan to Mr. Skerritt and his friends Hartley Henry, Alec Lawrence. And the wording, I may get it wrong, but the essence of it was that the Electoral Commission, probably on the urgings of the people that we led, had decided to embark upon a process of electoral reform, essentially to clean the list and to issue ID cards. And an interesting part of that communication was that if you allow, to Mr. Skerritt, if you were to allow electoral reform as these guys are proposing, and he's described that these guys were involved in madness, that is, the commission was involved in madness to be talking about electoral reform, to include cleaning the list and ID cards. And if that were to be allowed, then the legacy of Mr. Skerritt of winning elections would be no more. And that is significant. The elections we just had there, the sham elections that we just had, was a direct reflection of the fear of electoral reform on the part of the Mr. Skerritt, the fear of electoral reform and the damage it would have done to his winning legacy. Because I believe that Mr. Skerritt is satisfied that with the advent of electoral reform, he could not win an election. So that sham we saw was a reflection of that. We all know, and I just indicated that this, as far as we're concerned, this process of advocacy started way back in 2005. And we all know the history of efforts that have been made to get electoral reform in this country. We know the recommendations that have been made by individuals, institutions. And those efforts have been frustrated completely, totally, by the Mr. Skerritt's administration. To some credit, measure of credit, if you like, to the commission, sometime in 2019, the commission embarked upon an exercise to bring about the essential feature of cleaning of the list. And they were going to do that by appointing enumerators who would go through the country, go to the homes, check, identify who is there, who is not there, and to eventually remove from the list, the electors list, the names of people who were not qualified because they had not been in that constituency or indeed in the country for the constitutionally and legally identified period of time. That decision was taken by the commission. The commission consists of at least three lawyers, a senior lawyer and a senior counsel, and some lawyer in between in terms of experience and qualification. My understanding is that before they embarked upon that exercise, they also checked with a former chairman of the Electoral Commission, also a lawyer, a senior lawyer. The exercise was aborted, and we were told by some, including the senior lawyer who was on the commission, that the commission did not have the legal authority to so embark on that mission. Complete codswallop, as they say. 4 lawyers telling you that under the acts and regulations, the commission had the authority to do that exercise, to clean the list. What happened, of course, is that the funding of the exercise was in the hands of the Minister of Finance, and they did not provide the money. So that effort was balked, it was stymied, it was stalled, it was killed, all in the fear of electoral reform. And we know the history again. After constant pressure, 2019, after the 2019 election, Mr. Skerritt solemnly promised the people that he was going to embark on this exercise, and he was going to engage, and he did engage Sir Dennis Byron to do this exercise. And he remember, challenged the then leader of the opposition, Lennox Linton, to agree that whatever Sir Dennis brings forward as recommendations, that he would, in advance, that's Lennox Linton, agree to sign off and to support what Sir Dennis would recommend. We know the CCJ, and I think Dr. Andrew alluded to it. The CCJ, having examined all the materials that was in front of it in respect of the election petition with respect to the 2019 elections, we know what they said. Every school child knows what the CCJ said, that these elections were tainted and elections should not go forward again on this basis. What they were saying is that the elections were illegal, they were not free and fair. And remember, central to our democratic process is free and fair elections. Listeners, anytime anybody tells you that all elections in Dominica have been free and fair, that is a blatant lie. And that all observers in the past have assessed the elections to have been free and fair. That is a blatant untruth, a lie, deliberate lie. The Commonwealth Observer Mission, with respect to the 2014 elections, at least they clearly said that the elections were not fair. The CCJ gave their opinion. The notion that the CCJ's opinion or the CCJ's comments were arbiter and they were not binding, that's beside the point. The CCJ had before it all the information that the court at first instance has, the High Court, that the appeal court had. They asked for submissions, written and oral, and they looked at what was there and they came to that conclusion. Interestingly, the OAS mission, which observed the sham election, which just happened, also said that Dominicans should not pursue election again under these rules. The same rules that the CCJ identified as not fit for purpose. The OAS have again repeated this. So, notwithstanding the sham election being called out of fear of the electoral reform, which I think Dr. Andrew mentioned, Mr. Skerritt knew that what Mr. Byron was recommending. The suggestion from Mr. Skerritt that he did not get Mr. Byron's report, first phase report, until December is not true. It is not true. Mr. Skerritt cannot convince anybody. And the OAS, this last observer mission, in their diplomatic language, have come to that conclusion. Okay? And so, out of fear of his legacy of winning elections being damaged, Mr. Skerritt hurried onto this last sham election. Now, we paid Mr. Byron $650,000 $50,000 to embark upon that mission, to tell us what to do. If you look at the terms of reference that were given to Mr. Byron, he was asked to tell us what to do with respect to the list, with respect to campaign financing, with respect to identification cards and all these things. So he has told us what to do. And among the things he told us to do is that we should have legislation passed in the parliament in January, which is ending in the next few hours. January. It has not happened. That is the first red flag, or one of the major red flags that might point us to the conclusion that Mr. Skerritt does not intend to give effect to the recommendations of Mr. Byron that we paid $650,000 for. Okay? So we need to be vigilant about that. And this notion again about changing the nomenclature, the terminology from electoral reform to electoral modernization, that is not simple. That is not just a matter of words. There is a meaning behind that. There is something behind that. This notion that, okay, we've always had properly conducted elections, and this is just a matter of moving from a television box to a, what do you call it again, flat screen television and so on. That is a smoke screen. And when we see these red flags, we must take note of them. And it is the people's power that will force the people, that will force who is in authority to respond to the people and the people's wishes. And so it is important for the people not to sit back, but to be out there demanding electoral reform. The first process of that electoral reform involves going to the parliament with the legislation. The parliament is meeting on the 7th of February. There is no reason why that legislation dealing with the Registration of Electors Act and the accompanying regulations, there's no reason why those two bits of legislation should not have been before, or should not have been dealt with in January as was recommended, or should not be on the other paper for the 7th of February meeting. And when we hear the Prime Minister talking about he accepts the recommendations, the proposals of Mr. Byron, that is not true. Mr. Skerritt is actively involved in trying to push back on some salient recommendations from Mr. Byron. And so the people must understand that. We have a responsibility, those of us who know, have a responsibility to tell the people. We are talking about consultation. The process by which Mr. Byron arrived at where he is now involved widespread consultation. The terms of reference required him to have these consultations with the government, with the political parties, with the civil society, with organizations, with individuals, to get written and oral submissions and to look at those things and to put forward their recommendations, reduce them to legislation, draft legislation, which has been done. So everything has been done. The consultation has happened. So I'm careful about us leaving it to Mr. Skerritt to go through a process of island-wide national consultation again, which already he has started to fall back on in terms of a timeline, and for him to use that as the basis to delay this process, because the recommendation from Mr. Byron is that the legislation, as I said, the registration and the of Elections Act and the regulations be passed in January, and the process that will kick off the process. Once that legislation is passed, the process for implementation is placed now in the hands of the Electoral Commission to implement. At the end of that exercise, we would have the list cleaned. The mechanisms are provided for in the law, and the list would be cleaned within 6-7 months. So if we were to start, let's say we start in February, because we can't start in January now. February, you have March, April, May, June, July, August. That is 6 months. You allow another month or so for just spare time. So September, October, that process should be completed. In the meantime, the recommendation is by April that the other bit of legislation, that is the House of Assembly Act, which will deal with the question of campaign financing, access to the media, things like bribery and treating, things like any suggestions for the modification amendment of the commission, and things of that sort would come in the House of Assembly Act. But that will not require the same kind of time frame for implementation as will be the case with the registration process. So when you dovetail the two, by September, October, the whole process should have been completed and ready at that time. And that is why the suggestion that election should be held by the first quarter of 2024 is reasonable based on the recommendations. But it has to be that pressure is kept, the people's pressure is mounted and sustained to ensure that the government does what is supposed to be done. And so we cannot sit back, and we must make our presence felt, and we must make our story known to Mr. Skerritt. There are 26 people in the cabinet now, in the cabinet now, I understand. 26 people. Okay. I don't know what they'll be doing. Mr. G, you talk about constitutional reform and all that. As you know, our administration, United Workers' Party administration, mindful of that, asked Mr. Telford Georges to assist us in doing a constitutional review. We did not have the numbers in the parliament to give effect to any meaningful change. And as you said, we were there for a short time. But that is very important for us to attend to. But then that is another story. Let us get the electoral reform happening so that we can have free and fair elections. And remember, in all this process, democracy demands that we must have fair elections. Fair elections. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Mr. James, for the opening remarks here. I'm going to go over to Alvin, but Alvin, when you've listened to Dr. Andre, and you've listened to former Prime Minister Edison James, and when he looks at the chronological order, a very orderly process, it seems that Sir Dennis Byron was looking at. He recognized there was a need for urgency. Right? He spoke to the people of Dominica, the various groups, the various sectors of society. He spoke to them and they expressed the urgency in getting these reforms. He saw the note coming from the CCJ. I'm pretty sure he, just like all of us, he read the reports from the OAS and CARICOM and all these other folks. And he saw that everybody is saying, listen, fellas, this thing is tainted, fix it. Don't go back to have another election without putting your house in order. So he gave us his documents, and as Mr. James told us, he told us by January, look, here is the legislation you asked for, you pay me for it. Look take it to Parliament in January and get it passed so that the Electoral Commission can do its work, as Mr. James was explaining to us. He's further stating, from what I can gather from Mr. James, that in April he would have the next phase, which is the House of Assembly Act. Up to now, we haven't gone to Parliament to do something about the first phase, the recommendations that we got. Now, why is it that we are going to Parliament in February, and as Mr. James has said, we're not tabling any of the things that the man has told us we can, and since I think November, I think we understood that the Prime Minister, since November he had his documents?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the hold up? Why it could not have gone in January? Why we're going to Parliament in February and it's still not being tabled? So again, Alvin, you're a former public servant. You have the ins and outs on those things. I don't know anything. I'm in the private sector. Help us out with that. Tell us, why is it you think that?
Well, thank you, Mr. G. Thank you, Sheridan. Let me say a pleasant good evening to my fellow panelists, Mr. Edison James, and my good friend, Justice Andre and Lambi on the console. Good to see you, brother. And to our many viewers and listeners who are logged in with us, I'm sure the numbers are, I'm sure, increased by now. And to say thank you for inviting me to share my little 5 cents. It's not even 10 cents, it's 5 cents, Sheridan. I know Mr. James have like 25 cents and Irving maybe have a 50 cents, but I just have a little 5 cents to share.
But your 5 cents is in US, man. He's only
But let me say though that it would have been so much different if we were this evening discussing maybe certain aspect of the legislation. That's a discussion we should have been having now. The discussion we're having right now is discussion we've had 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and even as far back as 13 years ago, where I'll make a few references in a minute. So what I think it is, we have arrived at, one might say, the fuck in the road. And you know, when you arrive at the fuck in the road, what you got to do? You got to make a decision, because there's nowhere else to go. So that's where we are now on this particular matter. And I think, quite frankly, we have exhausted all the discussion there needs to be on that. Change is difficult, and change can be painful. And to get change sometimes, it requires pain, and it requires going through difficulty. So I'm saying this to say that the people of Dominica now needs to take this matter into their hands. By whatever means necessary, I will say. Our constitution, or the preamble of our constitution, starts off by saying, whereas the people of Dominica, and we might want to interpret that as well to say, we the people. That's how the constitution is framed. Whereas the people of Dominica, and we may want to phrase it to say, we the people of Dominica, we the people of Dominica demand change now. We the people of Dominica are going to do what it takes to get our electoral reform now. Section C of that preamble of our constitution reads, whereas we the people of Dominica have asserted, you hear the word? Asserted, assertion. That means we are not playing with this. Asserted their belief in a democratic society in which all persons may, to the extent of their capacity, play some part in the institution of national life, and thus develop and maintain due respect for lawfully constituted authority. It goes on to say in section E, whereas we the people of Dominica desire that their constitution should make provision for ensuring the protection of the Commonwealth of Dominica of fundamental human rights and freedom. Now, therefore, the following provision shall have effect as the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica. So clearly, what I'm saying there is to say that all this matter of electoral reform rests within the people. And all this other discussion now as to consultation or not consultation is irrelevant. I think the people have to take the bull by the horn now. And let me say a couple of things on that to bring it into some kind of perspective. Sir Byron's letter is quite, how should I put it? Is as clear as daylight. His letter of November 6th. There were timelines stipulating exactly what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, how it needs to be done. So in terms of, again, consultation, that's water under the bridge. That doesn't obtain anymore. Part of Sir Byron's letter, in his letter of November 6th, he wrote, quoted, it was also considered that consensus, and that's the letter he wrote to the leader of the opposition and also to the prime minister. It was also considered that consensus resulting from consultation with the Electoral Commission would increase the probability of acceptance of the proposed reform. Consultation took longer than anticipated, as it was characterized by robust discussions and even resulted in several modifications to draft of the legislative instruments. That's Sir Byron writing that in that letter of November 6th. I am pleased to report that the draft legislations now presented to you has the consensus of the Electoral Commission, unquote. Now, let's go back to our Constitution, our Bible, we the people. Section 38 of the Constitution, 38(1), says the Electoral Commission shall be responsible, this is me, shall be responsible for the registration of voters for the purpose of electing representative and for the conduct of elections of representative and senators, and shall have such powers and other functions relating to such registration and election as may be prescribed by law. But here's the kicker. It goes on into section 3, and hear what section 3 says. Section 4. Hear what section 4 says. The Electoral Commission may make such reports to the President concerning the matters for which it is responsible under the section, which is section 38, or any draft bill or instrument. You see exactly what Sir Byron referred to in his letter, or instrument that is referred to it under section 51 of this Constitution, as it may think fit, and if the Commission so requests, any request in any such report other than a report on a draft bill or instrument, that report shall be laid before the House. Section 51. And that's a problem we have, you know. We the people have to understand, because in your comment, Mr. G, you made reference to a number of areas that you think requires reform. And while I agree with you, as exists now, there are legislations, there are regulations that we the people can insist take effect, even under the current regulations of Electors Act, where the Commission could act. Section 51. Section 51, as referenced in Section 38(4) of the Constitution. Every proposed bill and every proposed regulation or other instruments having the force of law relating to the registration of electors for the purpose of electing representative or to the elections of representatives and senators shall be referred to the Electoral Commission and the chief election officer at such times as shall give them sufficient opportunity to make comments thereon before the bill is introduced to the House, or as the case may be, the regulation or other instrument is made. Clearly, Mr. G, all of this nonsense that the Prime Minister is speaking, he has absolutely no jurisdiction there. The only jurisdiction or the only function that the Prime Minister has is, as Minister of Finance, to make funds available to the Commission. Simple. That's it. Anything else as it relates to the reform and the work of Sir Byron has to be undertaken by the Electoral Commission in keeping with the provision of our Constitution. And we the people now must ensure that the sections of our Constitution are implemented accordingly. So the Prime Minister, he has no jurisdiction. He cannot say, well, oh, I have to look at the draft. Section 51 doesn't give that to him. Nobody or no authority can direct or indicate to the Electoral Commission how they operate. They are an instrument and a creature of the Constitution. So all that talk that the Prime Minister is talking is irrelevant, makes no absolutely nonsense. He has no jurisdiction. The electoral reform is not a political quote unquote football. This is beyond that. So I'm saying very candidly here that the people of Dominica now need to take charge of that. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, he visited Atlanta earlier last year, 2022, and he presented to what was called the Atlanta University Center Consortium. And that is a consortium of Clark, Atlanta University, Spelman, Morehouse. So that's a consortium. Generally a lot of HBC, Black University, but very well-renowned universities in Atlanta. And here is what he stated, which I think speaks as well to Dominica. Because as you know, the whole question of democracy is at risk to out here in the US. And we know the debate and the discussion that is going on. So that's a real thing. And there is this nexus between electoral reform, election, your election process, and democracy. Here's what the president says, quote, "In our lives and the lives of our nation, there are moments so stark that they divide all that came before from everything that followed. They stop time. They rip away the trivial from the essential. And they force us to confront hard truths about ourselves, about our institutions, and about our democracy," unquote. I think that applies quite fittingly to our situation, Dominica. We have to ask the hard truth about ourselves, the hard truth about our institutions, our electoral commission, our judiciary, what the CCJ said as far as the tainted elections, and about our democracy. There was earlier last year when one of your hosts in the program, Sean, on the Talk on the Block, one of the programs, he referenced an open letter that was written by proprietor Sam Raphael back in 2010. That's 13 years ago, dealing with the question of electoral reform. And as I know, as of now, Mr. Raphael is still a very influential businessman in Dominica. And that is where the call has to go to. The call has to go to each and every one of them in Dominica, all the business persons in Dominica, the church people in Dominica, the unions in Dominica, the private sector in Dominica. We the people, as I said, based on our constitution, and confront the hard truth about ourselves, about our institution, and our democracy. Here's what he started off, and I'll reference his letter. I'm going to reference quite a bit in his letter because I think it's important. It's very important because, as I said, he's a prominent businessman in Dominica. He's not any little wishy-washy. And I would think that he has influence even now as he had 13 years ago, if truth were to prevail.
Yeah, in a while. I'll want to go to Lambi to take some calls in a while.
Yes, right? But let me just quickly refer to that because I think it's important. It's very important. It is with heavy heart that I write to you regarding the recent general election of 2009 and the implication as we forge ahead. This may come as an unpleasant surprise, especially since many of us have started going on with our post-election daily lives today. Same can be said from the last election of 2022. I will make it my duty to inform you that an impending crisis which must be addressed and corrected if we are to pass on our beautiful, unspoiled island and the tradition of decency, democracy, freedom, and the rule of law to our country, unquote. Question remains, does that still obtain now? And who else in Dominica subscribes to those comments as we deal with this all-important matter of electoral reform? I pause here for now.
Yes, Alvin, thanks a lot for that. I'm going to go over to Lambi for him to give the people the numbers so they can pick some call. But Dr. Andrew, I want to alert you that I'm going to come back to you because once Lambi has given the numbers, and then while we await the calls, I will kind of come back to you because, you know, we've litigated this thing here. It's clear that all the work has been done. I think the conclusion is that the people now have to show their resolve to get the electoral reform. Clearly, Mr. Skerritt said to all of us in a press conference that he has absolutely no problem with any of the recommendations made by Sir Dennis Byron. He said that to us. We have him on record saying that. I hope he will stick to that because clearly the recommendations were made. But so far, Dr. Andrew, he has not stuck to that because, look, he was supposed to go to Parliament in January. The only thing the executive branch is charged to do is to take these bills to Parliament for passage so that the Electoral Commission can do its work to clean the list and so on. But he has failed to do that. He has failed to go to the Parliament in January. He's going to Parliament in February and he's still not tabled, as far as I'm aware, for discussion in Parliament. So, Dr. Andrew, when I come back to you after Lambi, I would want you to try to address some of those things to see where we go forward from there and whether, in fact, the meeting of Parliament on the 7th of February provides an opportunity for the people of Dominica to show their resolve and maybe come down to tongue in a few numbers and to let the political directorate know, yes, they agree with them, that they support the recommendation of the Dennis Byron. So please get this thing to the House so that it can be discussed and passed so that the Electoral Commission can do its work. So Lambi, let's take a few calls. I'll give the people the numbers and see if we can take a couple calls, and then I'll go over to Dr. Andre.
Good evening. You are listening and viewing the Global View and Q. We are taking your calls right now. Let me give you those numbers. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Let me run that one more time. 449-3095, 96 and 97, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yeah, so Dr. Andrew, while we await the call, so Lambi will interrupt us when you get the calls, but certainly, you know, we need to look at this. I mean, we need to go forward with this thing. I mean, it's no point everybody saying, yes, we agree with all the recommendations, and yet we're not doing anything. We're talking about election in 5 years' time, but nothing is being said about, look, let us get this job done in Parliament. You want to take a quick call before I go to Dr. Andre, Lambi?
Yes, we've got a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening to you, Lambi, and good evening to the panelists on the show tonight. I heard you a little bit of the conversation, and I heard you guys talking about the electoral reform. Gentlemen, I have said it before. We have 20 years of an individual whose words and actions do not match. We've had countless evidence from an individual who has proven to us that his interest and his objective is not for the development of the people of Dominica. We've had countless examples of misguided lies, propaganda, even in the House of Parliament, where the laws are supposed to be created for our coexistence in Dominica. My friends, my biggest issue is we are beating around the bush and expecting something from an individual who has, the election cycle is every 5 years. So that means if you have a plan, you have a 5-year plan. This guy's in office for over 20 years. And the talk of electoral reform has been one of futility for one reason only. It's because the individual had no intention. And what we have seen is a manipulation of the system and a disregard for the people of Dominica who the government is supposed to serve. The courts have been destroyed, the police service have been destroyed, and every instrument of a democratic government have been destroyed. So what is even worse is the guy is not hiding his intentions. He's never hidden his intentions. He said how long he wants to be in power. He's making it clear he's a dictator. He's shown us how he can get away with stuff and tells us he can talk to any one of us how he wants. And I want to agree with you guys. The people of Dominica have to stand up and decide enough is enough. And unless that happens, we will not be getting a reform from the people, for the people, by the people. I mean, with the amount of lawyers and educated people we have in Dominica, we have one individual, Mr. Byron, who is trying to dictate to us or tell us how our government system should run. When we have a parliament with over 21 constituencies, currently 18 representatives, and not one of these individuals elected by the people of Dominica can sit down and decide how we want to govern ourselves. That is a problem. That is a serious problem. It tells us even while we are talking about independence in today, over 40-something years of independence, we cannot govern ourselves. That is a serious problem. And we keep talking about expecting Roosevelt's carry to do things that will increase.
Let me just interject something with you, because I think we are agreeing on a few things here. I want to get your further specific recommendations for the way forward. What I think we're saying here is that the people must now step up. I think we're saying there is an opportunity on the 7th of February when the parliament meets. If the people were to gather in large numbers, very peacefully, and convey to the political directorate, the time is up, it's time to have the reforms, they need to go to parliament, to table those bills and get them passed so that the electoral commission can issue. Do you agree that is probably the way forward to go with this?
That has to be the way forward. At this point, I think anything that the government does has to be coming from the people. And I totally agree with you. There needs to be a mass of people in front of their parliament, not the government parliament. It's their parliament where the folks are supposed to work on their behalf to make sure that their presence is felt, and understand that this country cannot be dictated to or led by or controlled by or fashioned by one individual. And I totally agree with you at this point. What the civil servants, what the union should be doing, what the opposition should be doing, what the people should be doing is to show their disgust with the delay tactics and ensure that the reforms that are necessary for a true democracy goes forward. Unless we do that, I think we just going to have to try to salvage a country that's lost.
Yeah, point well made. Point very well made. Appreciate that contribution. Lambi, you want to take another call before I go to Dr. Andre? Let's go to Dr. Andre. You'll interrupt us if you need to. Dr. Andre, let us move forward with this, because it seems to me that we seem to be arriving at some consensus between us and the callers. This needs need for the people to act now.
Well, absolutely. But before I make my contribution, let me just respond to Mr. James. Mr. James, I'm not a bank. I don't keep secrets. But Mr. James said, trusted me with some documents which revealed, in the best traditions of the movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where the statue of gold is buried. So I wanted to make copies of those documents, and I have made copies. So I will be sending it to him via a third party in the next week or two. So, Mr. James, let not your heart be troubled. I'll be coming with my shovel and pickaxe when next I visit Dominica, which hopefully will be sooner than later. But let's get back to the point of electoral reform and the point of where do we go from here? Quo vadis Dominica? Bear in mind one thing, that after the declaration of the so-called elections, Many regional bodies, media houses, opposition parties, certain politicians were very, very concerned at this decision to cynically go forward with this plan, given that the only reasonable justification for it was to thwart, was to bypass or sideline the proposals that Justice Byron was going to put forward. Nothing else explains that decision, quite frankly. So that when we talk about what is our response as a people, not only do we have to make it clear to the parliament what we feel about the urgency of these reforms, but we have to make it clear to the region, and to the international community that we are concerned enough about the future of our country that we're prepared to walk or to stand up and show our concern that all is not well in the state of Dominica, that we're not sitting idly by and allow our laws to be trampled upon for one cynical justification to maintain a kind of perpetual hold, not perpetual light, a perpetual hold over the sinews of power in Dominica, so that the international and the regional community both are watching us very closely. They want to see what mettle do Dominicans have. They want to see to what extent that they treasure or value their democracy. They want to see what type of backbone Dominicans have. They want to see whether we are man enough or woman enough to stand up for those principles that on which our democracy is based. So they're looking at us, quite frankly, very closely. They want to see to what extent do we have any commitment to democracy. And why do they want to see that? Because they know that in their own neck of the woods, whether it's in Jamaica or Trinidad or Antigua or St. Kitts, which prevented persons from landing in St. Kitts to steal the elections. They want to see to what extent that we will stand up and engage just in peaceful protest without any rancor, without any disruption of anybody else's lives. What are we prepared to do to safeguard our democracy? So this is not so much about the parliament. This is about Dominica. The Dominica we know that is on trial. You know, we as the Dominican people, as the electorate, we are the ones who are on trial because we are the ones who will be scrutinized with a view to determine just what we will do when the sinews of our democracy are being taken as if they are the personal items of property of someone who is hell-bent to maintain power at any cost. So we are the ones who are on trial. Nobody else. Not the parliament, not even the government. It is Dominicans who are on trial. And the world, the region, they are waiting and they are watching with bated breath. Thank you.
Now, Mr. James, and Lamb, you can interrupt us if you have some calls. But Mr. James, from what I'm gathering, I heard the leader of the Dominican Labour Party say that they have no problems with the recommendations of Sir Dennis Byron. My understanding is that the United Workers' Party is okay with going ahead with the recommendations. That is my understanding. I may be wrong, but that is maybe all right to go ahead with those recommendations. I have not heard any objections from any of the other sectors as regards going ahead with those recommendations. The people should have absolutely no problem demonstrating peacefully that they are certainly in support of these recommendations going ahead, and they should show some resolve in having those recommendations implemented as early as possible. I don't think anybody can go wrong if there seems to be consensus on this. Your thoughts? You want to unmute your mic before you go.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Andre wholeheartedly. And before I proceed, let me say I've noted his intention to come with pickaxe and shovel by my place.
To take the goals?
Oh, pardon?
To take the goals?
Did he say pickaxe and shovel? So I will see how he can help me to reap some dashing and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with him.
Take?
I agree with him in the context of the comment he made about the people. It is, we are under scrutiny. As a people, we're under scrutiny. I spoke to a former prime minister, regional prime minister, yesterday, and one of the things he said to me is that, you know, in Antigua, we cannot vote without ID cards. Okay? We cannot vote without ID cards. The comment you made, Dr. Andre, about the people, this matter is a matter of tremendous national people's interest. And the people, and Sheridan, you started your engagement with me just now about the United Workers' Party. The people cannot just leave it to the United Workers' Party or any one organization. In a time past, when people felt that the direction in which the country was going was not where they wanted it to go, and they felt that way passionately, and the people decided to act collectively. So the unions were involved. Alvin, the unions were involved. The DIC were involved. I think I heard you, Mr. Sheridan, Mr. Gregoire, remind us the other day that you are from the private sector. The private sector was involved, whether it's through the DIC, the DHT, or what have you. The unions, everybody. Where they know? Where are they now? At this time when the region and the world are focused on us, what kind of people are we? What kind of people are we that will continue to take this kind of treatment from the people we put in office for so long? So whether you are a man on the street, whether you are a public servant, whether you are in the private sector and you're selling cloth, you're selling books, or you're selling cement or what have you, you need to stand up and be counted. You need to be there. You need to show your face. Because we know the old cliche, when the rain falls, it falls around of us. You can turn a blind eye now because you are benefited in some way. You can do that and say, it's not my business. I'm getting my this and I'm getting my that. I'm getting my benefit here. I can sell this, I can sell that there. But what are you doing? What are you doing in terms of giving up this country to people who are interested in advancing their own personal ambitions? How can it be that you told the people that you're going to reset? And one of the reasons you're going to reset is because you have some incompetent people around you, okay, who will not serve the people. And when the people call them for service, they're on the telephone and they're too busy. But when it's time to go out to regional meetings, they are there. So you want to get rid of them and you say, they're there, you know, they listen to me, I'm not afraid of them. So I'm going to reset. And you reset and you bring them back in positions where they are benefiting even more significantly. You bring them to advise you. The same people who were in the cabinet and who were so incompetent, who were so delinquent, you bring them back. So the people out there have a right to ask, who are you? Who are you, Mr. Businessman? Who are you, Mr. Union Man? Who are you, Mr. Professional? Who are you, Mr. Lawyer? They have a right to ask that and to be cynical about who we are. So please do not just leave it to those others. This is an appeal to all of us, because this country will go to hell in a handbasket. If one man, two men, three men believe that they can do what they want with us, how they want. And you see, so long as they believe that they will never lose election, because they cannot lose election in the absence of electoral reform. I'm convinced about that. With the money, with the mendicancy, with the dependency, and everybody must eat out of the hands of one man, all our money, $4 billion outside there, you understand? And such of it that comes into the hands of one man who then dishes out to us, you know, in bits and pieces at his whims and fancies. So long as we have that situation, they will never leave office because we do not have electoral reform, and they know then that they cannot lose office. They will treat us as a piece of whatever. And it's not only Edison James they'll treat that way, or you, Sheridan, or Alvin, or Dr. Andre. They'll treat all of us that way. So please, Mr. Gregoire, we are hearing what you're saying. You're calling on the people. You're a prominent person in this society. You've made the opportunities available for a number of people to be able to earn a daily bread. You've been a footballer, a cricketer, a pole vault and high jump man and all that. So you are very important.
Thank you for that. Thank you for.
So you're a good person to be making that call. You're a good person to be making that call. Probably some of the other organizations are fed up with making calls and find that, you know, some people decide that the call is not coming from the right place. So make that call. Continue to make that call. You said the 7th is a good time for people to be around the parliament. It is entirely possible for the government, the administration, to have the legislation with respect to Registration of Electors Act and the regulations before in front of the parliament for passing by the end of February. They've missed the January mark. They will miss the February 7th mark. But by the end of February, so they'll be just 1 month out. It's entirely possible for that to be there before the parliament. And it's important because that kicks off the process that will allow us to have reform in the shortest possible time. I just want, because I'm on the panel and I think if you know better, you do better. I just want to say 2 things, corrections. On the question of the appointment of the chairman of the Electoral Commission, the president does that in his own deliberate judgment. That is what the Constitution says. Mm-hmm. What happens in effect is a different thing, because Member Charles are removed from the bench, the House of Parliament as the minister, and then just jump over the wall and went into the president's office. So what happens there in terms of that constitutional directive, it could be you know, it's out of our hands. And the other matter is that the Electoral Commission, with respect to the new laws, must wait with respect to the question of, let's say, ID cards, and particularly the question of fingerprinting, the biometrics, and the provision in the law, in the proposed legislation, is for the fingerprints to be the biometric that will be used. There is some resistance, I'm aware, to that. Some resistance, I'm aware to that. Okay. The question of Mr. Byron's citing the CCJ ruling is a problem for some people because they feel that that is really diminishing their election victory in 2019, because the regional body has said that those elections were essentially a sham, they were illegal, they were legitimate, and what have you. That's a problem. The OAS have now come and said the sham in 2022 was also a sham, illegal, and whatever, and the rules should be changed. So that's where we are. But I would say that the urgency is there for the legislation to be put to the parliament, not later now than the end of February, taking everything into consideration and being practical. But the people must say to the government quite clearly, we do not intend for you to take us as fools anymore. Because they really, Mr. Sheridan and the Labour Party are taking Dominicans for bloody fools. Let's be frank. They're taking us for bloody fools. I can play you for fools. I will ignore the recommendations from the OAS, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the CARICOM. I will ignore those recommendations. I will ignore the recommendations from consultants that I have engaged. I will ignore the recommendations, the proposal of the Electoral Commission. I will ignore the recommendations of the man I've paid $650,000 to, and you can do nothing about it because you are just a bunch of weak-kneed cowards who have to be eaten out of my hands, and so I can do what I want with you. And that is not only for the Mali way, it's for all of us who go around the place at big voucher beating our chest that we are this and we are that, we are professionals in that. All of them, all of us, Mr. Skerritt and the Labour Party, reset or no reset, they're taking us for a bunch of fools. And they are being encouraged in that by people like Hartley Henry, who controls Skerritt, like people like Anthony Hayden, who controls Skerritt, who controls our money, our $4 million. You heard Mr. Linton the other day, the architect of the disclosure of the money that we're being owed, our money that's been held by people like Anthony Hayden. And Joseph Isaac, the speaker, has forbidden the name of Anthony Hayden from being called in the parliament. Imagine that, a man who is playing such a pivotal role in our country using our money. The Speaker of the Parliament, in contravention of our constitution, which gives the parliamentarians immunity in terms of their ability to speak freely. He's saying we must not call Anthony Hayden's name in the parliament. That's the man who holds our money, controls our money. And now, as you heard Mr. Linton say, they are dispensing it a little bit, and they're sending it to Mr. Skerritt. He controls everything, and he controls all of us. So, Mr. Gregoire, keep calling. If you have to dedicate your program, your radio station from now till then, keep calling. Keep calling Dominicans. And Dr. Andre, keep reminding Dominicans that the focus is on us, all of us, not the political leader of any party, not even the leader of any union, not the leader of any organization like DIC or DF Hotel Association, but on all of us. Thank you.
Yes, and one of the things I would like to do, Lambi, you have a call you want to take before I go on? If you do, let's take it.
There was someone on there a while ago. Let's see if they're still there. Call, are you still around?
Still there.
Yes, go ahead.
Still there, Lambi, still there.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. G, Mr. James, Dr. Andre, and Alvin. Good evening.
Evening.
Conversation. But Mr. G, the problem I have is that before this recommendation go to Parliament, that report should be already out so the people could familiarize themselves with it. They should send it. The Electoral Commission should be out already on the campaign, educating the people about the changes. You cannot just get a report from Mr. Andrew and from Dennis Byron and go to Parliament with it. I don't trust none of these guys, none of Skerritt or none of them. I don't want no jabber sack. We want to know the recommendations. And that is a clear indication that Roosevelt Skerritt doesn't want any electoral reform. Because he has the report. So on the first sitting of this new parliament, the people should be out demanding that they need that report. We want to see the report. The business sector, the churches, the different political parties, the NGOs, they should familiarize themselves with this report already so the process could begin. The process has to begin with the people. We want to know what are you going to do. You understand? The exercise for no reform, no election was successful, but now it's time to follow up. The people have to get up and stand up and say, you know what? It's time we see that report so you could go to Parliament with it, but we want to know what's in it. We want to know because we don't trust you because Mr. Skerritt, we know clearly, and he has proven again and again, they doesn't want that. At any time you have a free and fair election, they know they cannot win any election in Dominica with all this bribing and all this foreign money, they come in and Dominican money foreign. Mr. G, you don't realize we lose our political independence we get about 44 years ago, you know. Not economical independence, we never had that independent economically, but even our political independence. Anthony Hayden and the one from Barbados, who Mr. James, Hartley Henry and those guys who call in the shop. And that is wrong. Dominicans should be involved in our democracy. We have to protect our democratic system in Dominica. We cannot leave it up to these guys. Thank you, sir.
And thanks a lot for that contribution. Alvin, I think the caller is right. The report, to some extent, I mean, the contents of it, because if we're going to go to Parliament and we have legislation, it's going to get discussed in Parliament anyhow. So, and the fact of the matter is that the leader of the Dominica Labour Party has said to us very clearly, he has absolutely no problems with the recommendations that are contained in Sir Byron's first report. That's what he has said to us publicly. Now, What he's saying privately may be a different thing, but he has said to us publicly he has absolutely no problems with the content. So he should not have any problem allowing the Dominican people to see the contents of the thing if he has so much confidence in it. Because remember, he's the one who entered into a contract with this gentleman and paid him all this money to do it. So if you're happy about it, there should be no reason why you cannot share it with the people. So I agree with the caller to that extent. Alvin, so here it is. I mean, in terms of going forward, right? Because I mean, we don't have all the time left in the world on the program. Let me just say this. I intend to ask the leaders of the three main political parties, I intend to invite them to come on this show and let them express. And I say the leaders are the leader of the Dominican Labour Party, the United Workers Party, and the Dominican Freedom Party. I'm going to invite them to come on the show. Let us discuss where they are now. And because if I can do this on the 6th, because this meeting of Parliament is on the 7th, and to find out what it is that we are all doing collectively to get our people to come together and to say, yes, we support going ahead with the recommendations that are made. And we want to see the things tabled in Parliament as soon as possible in February so that it can be passed, so that the Commission can do its work to move ahead with the reforms. I'm going to invite Mr. Skerritt as the leader of the Dominican Labour Party, because I remember he was on Sam Raphael's show, The Other Side, and somebody called and asked him, well, look, if you can come on the Other Side show, why don't you go on Mr. G's show on Global View? And he said, oh, you'd love to come on the show, but Mr. Gregoire does not send his reporters, his news reporters to my press conferences. Well, as far as I'm aware, the last two press conferences that he had, Matt Peltier was there representing Q95. So it seems to me there is no further excuse about Q95 not attending his press conferences. So it's an open invitation to him right now, but I will be writing to him, and I will be writing to, because I think it is important for him to explain to us what is happening. Because listen, he has said he has no problems with the recommendation, but we're hearing that in behind the scene he's fighting tooth and nail against certain things. So we would really like to know if he has problems or if he has no problems, because basically the idea is we need to go forward with this thing. Lambi, you want to take a call before I go to no, okay. So Alvin,
well,
on this going forward.
Well, Mr. G, I have a complete different perspective on that, quite frankly. And I think part of our problems too is that I think sometimes we don't create our own narrative, and we respond to Mr. Skerritt's narrative, and that too is part of the problem. And I think we tend to give him more credence than he deserves. That too is part of the problem. We have to determine the narrative for our people. And it's time we forget and call him on a show. We've passed that stage. It's gone. That is out of the horses out of the stable already. We've gone past that. There's nothing need to explain. I would want to believe that Sir Byron had some sort of consultation with both the leader of the opposition, the ULP, and other parties in terms of what's more specific in the draft, the legislations and the proposal of the recommendations. I want to believe. I stand corrected. So this question of engaging discussion, we've passed that, Mr. G. Listen to what the Prime Minister said at the Independence Day just passed last year. While government engage him, Sir Dennis Byron does not report to the government. The Electoral Commission has been the coordinator of the activities of Sir Byron, and he has been working very closely with the Commission in carrying out his responsibility, unquote. So clearly, even the notion that the cabinet is not the cabinet the one to put the draft legislation to present it to the parliament. I just referred earlier to the Constitution. The Constitution is clear. The role of the Electoral Commission and who presents draft legislation. And Sir Byron's letter is quite clear too. His letter is very clear and explicit.
Yeah,
so,
but Alvin, you have to also be cognizant of the way these things operate. I mean, the Electoral Commission, remember they wanted to go out and do this job, and somebody wrote an email and they changed the members and they put 2 new lawyers. And hold on. So we have to be realistic. So, and that is why it's not going forward. So what I'm saying is this: I am talking about this man as the head of a political party. You have three major political parties. It's not the government, it's not the cabinet, it is three political parties that have equal say among everybody else. In other words, the political parties, the NGOs, the private sector, everybody, we're all interested, but the political parties are the people going to put up candidates to contest elections. Yeah. And therefore, as the head of political parties, we need to hear their views, because we're hearing one thing publicly and then we're hearing something else in the back. I don't say that we have to depend on what Mr. Skerritt or that person does or does. We have already made it clear that it is the people who have to take charge of their business and do what they have to do.
And that is exactly the point that I want to make. We have passed that stage of hearing their views. We know the United Workers' Party want electoral reform. We know their position they took at the last election. We know the Dominican Freedom Party want electoral reform. The Dominican Labour Party, I don't know. So therein lies the people has to demand it. And as I said, change can be painful. When in Antigua they got to that point where the electoral reform wasn't coming about, they hit the road. In Antigua, they hit the road and they did what they had to do to ensure that they get electoral reform. And I'm saying the time has come now. All of this talk where Prime Minister will come and say, well, I say I wanted it, or I didn't say I wanted it, or yes, or this is BS. At this point in time, as I said, we have arrived at the fork in the road. And the people, the mobilization of the people has to be done where it has to be sustained, it has to be consistent, and we have to keep moving and pressing and demanding electoral reform. All of this other thing, and to implement as it were, the timelines and the recommendations of Sir Byron. Interestingly, in terms of the point raised earlier by Justice Andre, and in terms of the international community and the region, again, I for purposes of our conversation here tonight, and that is where, based on, as Mr. James said earlier, you require all hands on deck, even those that we may perceive, like I say, I refer to Mr. Raphael, Sam Raphael, but the other business persons in Dominica, church leaders, business leaders, and all of those. The same Sam Raphael made a comment in his same letter, the international community by not being interested in Dominica per se. However, the Dominica scenario is of interest because of likely impact on the democratic process, the rule of law, and security in the wider Caribbean, and by extension, the Western Hemisphere. That's what he said in 2010. And I would just say that the same obtains now. And what I'm saying, Mr. G, is that we got to find a way to galvanize. And if it means starting on the 7th and sustain it, if it means starting on the 6th and sustain it, if it means starting on the 5th and sustain it, we have to put the pressure on the Electoral Commission, present whatever proposal that they agree to, consensus with them, to the Parliament, through the mechanism as contained in our Constitution, and ensure that the matter is presented to Parliament for debate and discussion. When it's presented there, the people has a right to gather outside the Parliament, to even enter the Parliament, and to hear what's going on as far as the debate on the matter as relates to electoral reform. All of these other conversations now with political parties, we have gone past that.
All right. So, Dr. Andre, we heard Alvin talk about the we have to do this, right? But in 1979, as we can recall, and as Alvin will recall, the we was the Committee for National Salvation. It wasn't any individual political party. It was all of the, as Mr. James mentioned earlier, all of these organizations were a part of a Committee for National Salvation, and they spoke with one voice. That committee does not exist today. In order to galvanize and everybody to come together, there has to be some kind of lead, something to catalyze it. Somebody has to take a lead in organizing. Most things don't just happen spontaneously like that. There has to be, and I'm hoping that there is something happening to bring that kind of, I know that there is this electoral reform coalition group, And I'm hoping maybe they can play a role in this, but it has to be some organization to bring people together. If people are going to come from the country, somebody might have to pay some bus fares for some people who really would like to but can't afford it. That kind of thing. So, Dr. Andre, your thoughts on that? Because I think we're all on the same wavelength. It's just a matter of the best way to get the action going.
Well, a concerted action, a collective action, a unified action, one voice, one heart, beating ferociously, beating because it has been energized by the cause for freedom, by the cause for good governance, by the cause for democracy, by the cause for a concern about our future. The fact of the matter is, if we continue on this course, there will be nothing left to preserve. Mr. G, I heard a caller on your radio today talk about the new influx of persons into Wesley. If what the caller was saying is true, then we will have another colony in Dominica, a beachhead, as it were. And that has to be a cause for concern. If this thing continues unabated, then there are Dominicans, your nieces, your nephews, your children, the younger generation, who may not be able to afford to buy a piece of their native land. It will be lost. And that is the prospect. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I don't think I'm exaggerating at all. Look at the businesses in Roseau. 15 years ago, we did not envision a situation where perhaps more than 50% of the small businesses in the island's capital are controlled by foreign interests. So this is not some academic type of exercise. This is not some abstract kind of theory, kind of extrapolation that I'm trying to make. This is a sad reality. Bear in mind, Dominica is a small island, 70,000 people to be generous. We cannot afford for a few thousands of persons of foreign origin to be controlling the economic sinews of the island. All will be lost. This is what is at stake. In many other countries, there are laws protecting the indigenous population from foreign encroachment. Members of the political directorate think that we should not have those laws. Anybody can come and set up shop here as long as they can buy a passport, whether it's an E-type or any other type. So we have to have a mass education as to the perils that we face as a community. If we can line up for gas, then we must be able to line up to preserve our democracy. Which is more important, Mr. G? You tell me. In India, the leader of the Congress party of the Gandhis, he just completed a march over 3,000 miles long. They call it the Yatra, I believe, something along those lines. A march to energize the people, to come together, to protect their country. It took him over 3 months. And he walked from one end of India to the other, accompanied by his supporters. Are you suggesting that we cannot even march a half a mile or a few hundred yards? If we can line up for hot bread in Pottersville, and I am guilty of that too, I must admit, why can't we line up to show our concern about our future as a country? Are you suggesting to me that the mastiff bread either from Suki or from Afuawi is more important than our future as a community? Is that essentially what you're saying to me? I would like to believe that you're not. As lovely as the taste of these wonderful breads are, they must play second fiddle when they are put at the side of our democracy, at the side of our future. Do we want to basically have a future where we're basically lining up on Wednesdays, fighting with each other to get a little handout? Or do we want a future where we are proud people going to work, earning a living? I can tell you one thing, Mr. G. pulling something from my own private experience. I've been in this legal profession for over 3 decades. I can tell you that the most enjoyable and productive part of that journey was the 9-year tenure I spent as a criminal defense lawyer, calling my own shots, deciding who I would allow to come into my building to practice with me and to build up their practice and so on. Because I set my own agenda, I achieved my own goals. And as I've tried to teach my 2 daughters, there is nothing as rewarding as to enjoy the fruits of your brow. That is the philosophy that we have to nurture a future Dominican on. Not begging, not stealing, not giving foreigners, selling the jewels of your citizenship, whether it's the parrots or the citizens or the land. Some things must be sacred. And if we don't think that certain things are sacred, we don't deserve it. We don't deserve to own it. And that is what's at stake as we speak.
Yes, Dr. Andre, and I was just again reflecting as I go to Mr. James, because I know Mr. James, you have a few things that you would like to contribute now. As I go to Mr. James, I was just thinking that, in 1979, there was the Committee for National Salvation. In 2022, a move was started to do an electoral reform coalition group, collaboration group. Can that group be strengthened and everybody join together with that group, all of the different sectors that we can come under that umbrella and say, okay, listen, we're speaking with one voice and we want to go ahead and have electoral reforms. Mr. James, your thoughts on that, as well as I know you want to say something about this whole question of land in the Wesley area. You might want to say something on that, but I know too that you might have noticed, as Dr. Andre said, when you walk around Roseau these days, what you see is that some foreign people in the shops, in the buildings around Rosa that used to house people like Lee Blanche Boutique and Venus and those kind of people, and so on. And today, the Dominicans are on the sidewalks, on the tents, if they can afford a tent. Your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, Sheridan, represented here among the comprising the four of us, you have four, I would say, identified sectors. You, the business sector; Alvin, the unions, the workers; Dr. Andre, the professionals; me, the political fraternity. Okay? After that, there are not many that are excluded, Okay? Hear what I'm thinking. With respect to this engage in the public, you have a major facility. You may want to consider putting a number of things aside and put them on hold for a while and embark upon an education program confined to letting the people know as much as possible the details of what Sir Dennis has put forward so far, contained in the Registration of Electors Act and the accompanying regulations, and his report that is available. So Dennis engaged in accordance with his mandate. He engaged with the political parties, leaders of political parties, and various organizations. All those organizations inputted into his work, and all those organizations which have knowledge of and access to his work should be free to communicate with their constituents in the broad sense. And so there should be no fetter on you facilitating the dissemination of the contents of Sir Dennis's report to the people of Dominica starting tomorrow, or as soon as possible, so soon as you can make the arrangement for that to happen. You may want to just make a shift in your program. I'm advocating that. I've heard you suggesting that the people should come together and they should look at the 7th as an important day. It is the 7th is the anniversary of when there was a gathering in Kennedy Avenue to discuss and to engage with the people on the matter of electoral reform. Coming out of that peaceful engagement on that day, three of us are before the courts from since 2017 on a bogus charge of inciting people to riots. A bogus charge. That's the 7th. And the 7th, they're going to Parliament. You mentioned the coming together and the solidarity among the people of Dominica in 79. There's a 7 there, you notice? A 7. It may well be that a call should be, that call you're making could probably be encapsulated in a call for electoral, so the 7th to be Electoral Reform Solidarity Day. Electoral Reform Solidarity Day. When all the institutions will take an appropriate action to be part of that electoral reform Solidarity Day. So the business places in Roseau should close their doors. Close their doors on that day in solidarity with the cause, because it's a big, big, deep and wide cause. It has a lot to tell us, a lot that we'll be saying about who we are if we'll just let this thing go. So let's think about it. And you have this, all of us here on the panel, 3 other panelists are giving you the responsibility to lead on that, because you have the facilities, you have the initiative and what have you. With respect to what you said about Wesley, I was in a discussion with some people on Sunday, including somebody who is deeply knowledgeable, aware, and involved in Wesley. And there's foreboding. There's cause for foreboding in that Wesley situation. I will say no more on that, except to say that in the report of Sir Dennis, he alludes to concerns that have been raised pertaining to the extent to which economic citizens are to be considered in this whole registration and eligibility for involvement in our election is concerned. And he makes the point that there's no constitutional barrier to all the people out there who are citizens of this country through the economic citizenship program to be able to vote. You understand that? What is happening in Wesley is of concern. The person who is controlling what is happening in Wesley is the man who controls over $4 billion and more. Is the man who has been negotiating between the involvement of people in our houses, whether it's residential housing, whether it is hospitals, whether it's health centers, whether it's community centers, and so on, and controlling our money. So I will say no more on that situation which you raised about Wesley, except to say, watch this space. Watch this space. But it's 10 o'clock, probably my last chance to say that Mr. Skerritt is my view. It is said that a man convinced against his will is not convinced at all. I think this electoral reform thing, as far as Mr. Skerritt is concerned, he's a man convinced against his will. And bearing in mind what I just said, a man convinced against his will is not convinced at all. When Mr. Skerritt says that he accepts everything that Mr. Byron proposes, it is not true. It's not true. And it would be irresponsible of me not to tell you that from what I know, it is not true. Okay? And when that is a feature of what he's putting forward to the public, there is foreboding. There's sinister considerations down there. And we need to be very careful about it. We could have trouble in this country. We don't want that. We want a peaceful, harmonized, forward movement of our country. We have been a peaceful country. We have been a productive country. We have been people who have been accustomed to, by our own bootstraps, pull ourselves up. By our sweat of our brow, we eat bread. We have been brought to a situation in which so many of us have to be dependent on one man being responsible for us to live. It is not good. And so long as we continue to be without electoral reform, we will continue to remain trapped and enslaved in this kind of situation.
And thank you for that, Mr. James. Alvin, I get a sense that from listening to Mr. James, he has knowledge that what Mr. Skerritt is saying and what he's doing behind the scenes are two different things. Can I, Lambi, you want to take a call before I go to Alvin?
Caller on the overseas line, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
You guys,
Good evening.
you guys talking about democracy. Dominica is not being governed in a democratic way. Every time I listen to that guy they call Skerritt, I don't call him prime minister, it's ridiculous. He reminds me of the leader in Iran or Venezuela. We do not have democratic principles in Dominica. Your police force can go and just arrest people. You see what happened in Memphis? And people are demonstrating in the United States. You see people being arrested like they would have been arrested in Dominica? No. This is democracy. Dominica is not a democratic country. Dominica is being run by a socialist dictator. Thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you for that contribution. So, Alvin, let me go over to you because, you know, as I said, if the leader of the Dominica Labour Party has the information, he has the report, he has the recommendations, and he tells the people of Dominica he agrees with everything that is in there. But Mr. James tells us that he knows that Mr. Skerritt does not agree with everything in there. And in fact, that he may behind the scenes be fighting tooth and nail to avoid maybe some of those recommendations. If that is the case, I think that would be a terrible tragedy. Because how can the person who's the leader of the country say to the country, I agree with everything in there, knowing fully well that he does not agree with some of the things that are in there? Your final words on some of those things, Alvin.
Yeah, Mr. G, in all honesty, are you surprised at that? Really?
I'm not surprised, but Alvin, I mean, it is, you know, really and truly think about it. When you listen to somebody and the tone and the manner in which they say something, you know what some people say as though butter can melt in their mouth?
I think one of the callers who called earlier, the very first call I believe it was, says that over a period of time for the last 15 or 20 years, we've seen the action of the Mr. Skerritt vis-a-vis what he says. And by now we should be able to come to some conclusion when he says something, whether the something he says is truthful or not. So honestly, I won't be surprised at that, you know. But let me just conclude, Mr. G, on making two points. The first thing I want to say, and I know you referenced the Committee for National Salvation, which I am pretty much, you know, knowledgeable of, came after. Remember the movement and the whatever and all of that took place prior. The Committee of National Salvation at the end came to say, well, okay, now that we have got to that point, how do we move forward? So the engagement has to start now. And I share and I agree with the proposal put forward by Mr. James. Let me make quickly one quick reference to the CCJ. And one of the things that they said has relations to Section 17 of the Registration of Electors Act. And what they said in their report, and several other reports, the OAS as well, the electors list is central to an election and internal democracy, the electors list. And it was noted that in the election prior to the last one in 2019, there was a patent non-compliance of the Section 17 of the regulations. Both Justice Glasgow concluded that, and the CCJ made the point that if that is correct, on the basis of that alone, that matter should be looked into. Let me take that over now to Dominica. In 2019, the Dominica had 74,895 registered electors, almost 75,000, and the population was 71. That's the electors list. Converse that with Antigua that just had the election a couple of days ago. Antigua had a population of a little over 90,000, 90 plus thousand thereabout. Their registered electors was 60 plus thousand. So a difference of about 30,000. Population, 90,000 plus, registered electors, 60,000 plus. Dominica now had the reverse. We had more registered electors than the population. And bear in mind your central list, which is what Sir Byron was saying in January. Let's deal with the registration act that deals with the electors list. This is central and crucial to an election. So this is where we are. Let's go back to some of the comments made on 79. Yeah, what? And again, I'm deliberately referring to Mr. Raphael. Because as I said, he's a prominent businessman. Let's not give him a easy pass out. And I'm sure all the other businessmen in Dominica who are listening to the program tonight, and all the other persons are listening, are taking note of where we are at this point as it relates to electoral reform. He went on to say, the charade will continue until the people collectively get tired like 1979 and raise up. The international community takes note and possibly apply pressure on the DLP to go back to the polls with election reform as soon as possible. PM Skerritt, or possibly PM Skerritt, will wake up one day and realize that democracy requires the rule of law, a free press, and a viable opposition, unquote. That's what Mr. Raphael said. Quite relevant today. So he is saying that until the people decide and they get tired and raise up like 1979 and do what they're supposed to do and go back to the polls with electoral reform, Prime Minister Skerritt will wake up one day and realize, hey, democracy requires the rule of law. I think we are at this point right now in our history. We are at this point. And I will close by stating that now is the time to act. All of those discussion is over. The CCJ have said it. The OAS have said it. The joint report by CARICOM, the Commonwealth, and the OAS have said it. Mia Motley report as way back as 2003 have said it. Sir Byron has his recommendation. There is nothing more to be said except to go to the people and explain to the people and engage the people and educate the people and say, guys, this is what needs to be done. This is what we need to do. Let's go get it done. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go win this one. Let's go fight the war. That's what needs to be done now. All these other discussions as to whether Prime Minister Skerritt agree, whether he doesn't disagree, whether he wants to implement, that's outside of his purview. He has no jurisdiction there. Whether he likes it or not, it's no jurisdiction. That's beyond him now. Like he said himself, so Byron reports to the commission. The commission get a draft. We're going to present the draft to Parliament. And we, the people, are saying that we want this matter debate. We will hear what's in the draft. And if there are certain things that we don't like in the draft, we'll oppose it. We'll raise hells about it. But this is the route we have to take now. Or the shenanigan of talking and not talking, I think we've passed that stage. We're now at the fork in the road, and it's now do or never. And that is what I would want to conclude. Let me just thank you and the rest of my other panels there, Mr. James, Justice Andre Lambie, and the many listeners and the callers, to say thank you and to say to Dominicans, we can do it. I always like to end on a positive and an optimistic note, and we can do it. The opposition party in Grenada stayed 2 terms out, complete. So Keith Mitchell won 2 terms. There was 15-0, 15-0. They came around, they reorganized, they re-energized, they re-engaged, and they said we had enough. In Antigua, Gaston Browne is on a thread, 9-8, compared to what he had previously. The Antiguan said, we have had enough. We're going to put you there, but we're going to put you there with 1-seat majority. And if you Malcase, we will do what we got to do as a people. I think Dominicans can do it as well. We have shown we have done it in the past, and I have no doubt we can again do it in the future. But it has to be done on a collective basis, organized basis. We determine our narrative and moving forward with what we want as far as electoral reform.
Thank you, Alvin. Clearly, you're right. I mean, the question, it has to be done on an organized basis, on a coordinated. I don't know whether, yes, Dr. Andre is still with us. It has to be done on a collective and organized. The only collective I see that is making some moves now is this coalition, electoral reform coalition group. I don't see any other one. The question is, I'm not sure how many organizations are reflected a part of that group that could speak with one voice to do the coordination that you're referring to. But I certainly feel that is a group that should be looked at because they've shown the willingness. They've started doing something. And I know that a couple of the opposition parties have been participating and supporting the work of that group. So I think we have to take a look at what that group is doing, and maybe some people can join, everybody can join up and contribute to that and have a coordination of effort in that regard. But I mean, as I go to Dr. Andre, let us not lose sight of the fact, Mr. James made some recommendations that I will look at. But remember, we're talking about an opportunity, Dr. Andre, that appears to exist on the 7th when the parliament meets. And all of what we're talking about, it means that if there can be coordination of efforts and that people can get together and motivate people to come to that location in a very peaceful way, but in very large numbers, at least that will convey to the people in office that Dominicans seriously want change, they seriously want electoral reform. I think the presence of people there in Roseau on that day can make a huge difference in developing not only some momentum, but in making it clear that they seriously want free and fair elections in Dominica. So, Dr. Andre, your final words?
Yes, before I do, let me commend and congratulate Mr. James and Alvin, Mr. Thomas for their excellent presentations. Let me again commend you, Mr. G, for making it possible, and let me commend Lambie for facilitating this discussion. There is something about that number 7. And you know, I'm not as a devout person as St. Thomas of Aquinas, but sometimes, as they say, the Lord speaks in strange ways. That number 7 is special, and it has significant biblical resonance, if I may use that term. First of all, we talk about the 7 wonders of the old world. We talk about God resting on the 7th day. The book of Revelation talks about 7 churches, 7 angels, 7 trumpets, and 7 stars. The Quran speaks of 7 heavens. In Hinduism, there are 7 higher words. In Buddhism, the baby Buddha rose and took 7 steps. Jackpots in most slot machines, the number 7 figures prominently. Needless to say, phone numbers typically have 7 digits. 7 is easily the most popular number. There are 7 days in a week. And last but not least, there are 7 deadly sins listed in the book of books. So there is something significant about that number. And who knows whether it's just coincidence, happenstance, fate, or destiny that the parliament is reconvening on the 7th of February, the 7th day. the day when Dominicans are being asked to rise from their slumber, where Dominicans are being asked to show the world how they care, the extent to which they care about their own heritage, whether they care enough about the erosion of their land, whether they care enough about the fact that it is fallen in foreign hands, whether they care enough to preserve their way of life, whether they care about the future of their children, whether they care about the nature of the democracy in which they live, whether they care to walk, not to throw stones, not to incite violence, but simply to show that this piece of land is worth preserving. If it is attractive to Canadians, to Europeans, to Chinese, and to other nationalities who have seen an opportunity to make Dominica their home, then why should it not be that we are not sufficiently concerned that we wish to state emphatically that this is in fact our home? So this is the test. It's not a matter of what the opposition does. It is a matter of what we do. It's a matter of what we are prepared to do. It is whether we are prepared to make the minimal sacrifice, to make the loudest statement that we're here, that we can sing the song of Short Shirt from Antigua. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me from where I come from. Or to sing the words of Soulpuss, his most recent song, as to why he will not leave. Somebody has to make the effort, make the sacrifice, and we have to help in those sacrifices being made. Because no man is an island. No struggle is won by the efforts of one person or a few persons. It is typically won by the collective activities of all those who've seen the light of redemption, the light of being activated to take a principled stand against the biggest threat to their livelihood. And so we wait and we see if we as a nation can meet and pass that test rather than sit aside and watch the tide take away what we've worked so hard for. That is the challenge that we face as a nation. Thank you to your listeners, and thank you to the radio station.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew. But Mr. James, as we go, because we're saying that the 7th is so significant, and there could be something happening on the 7th if people make the resolve to be there and show their presence there. Obviously, people who are in Dominica can make the commitment to show up, but Dominicans and the multitudes of Dominicans who are not in Dominica who would like to contribute in some way, they know they cannot show up, but certainly I believe they can send $20 to an organization. They can pay the bus for some people who really would like to get there, but they're unable to get there because they don't have the means. So I'm thinking, to me, everybody can contribute in some way. If you are not on the island, if you're overseas and you would like to make a contribution, I believe a $20 could help. If a number of people were to send $20, it adds up and it helps to gather people and help people to get there who really want to get there, but may not have the means to do so. And certainly the people in Dominica, I think I would encourage them to show up, because showing up really is saying that, look, I have a resolve. I want what's best for my country, what's best for the future of my children. And essentially, let's hope that people will. But I'm again saying that, things happen with coordination. The only organization I see that seems to be putting itself forward as an umbrella body that is willing to be an umbrella organization that can help to coordinate that is the Electoral Reform Coalition Group. Some political parties and other groups are already committed to participating in that. I hope they can get together and organize collectively to coordinate, as Alvin said, to get people out there on the 7th, peacefully so they can present themselves to the political directorate that they seriously want electoral reform now. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you. Thank you, Mr. James, for being here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you, Alvin. Thank you, Lambi and Sherwin. Thank you to all of our listeners and all the folks who stayed with us on Facebook. They're still with us. We didn't get a chance to acknowledge you, but I want you to know that we really appreciate you being there and happy that you could be here with us tonight. We've seen some of your comments and really, hopefully next week, we will continue the discussion, possibly with a different group. But the point is that we have to continue the discussion and continue moving towards taking action to get something done on electoral reform. I think maybe the 7th might be a good date on which to begin that action. So, good night, everybody. Till next time.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Yeah.
Good night, man. Good night. Take care. All the best.
All right.
All right.
All the best.
I'll be giving you a call just now, Mr. James.
Okay, no
All right.
problem.
It's
Okay,
nice.
then.
And Alvin,
Okay,
if you
Mr.
can send,
James. All
Alvin,
right.
if you can send me a copy of that letter from Sam Raphael, I'd appreciate that. I don't have a copy of that.
Yeah, I'll send it to
Me
you.
neither.
Oh,
Me
yes,
neither.
and send a copy
Okay.
to Mr. James.
I'll
as
send
well.
it to you.
And
I'll send it to you guys.
Yes,
Okay.
thanks.
Excellent.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
everybody. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, looking out my window. And I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by wars and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when this ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last, so free. Freedom has come. Freedom has come. Oh yeah. Shall heart sitting in seclusion. I'm in my meditation, and I can hear the voice of the sufferers cry for justice. Ooh. Another ugly war is a raging, threats of nuclear war is arising, and the world is gripped by fear of mass destruction. I'm saying, when this ugly war be over, and the children can go out and play, I wanna see when all oppression will be down,